Thank you for coming to this learning lab. We're really excited to share with you about the IANDA project and to really talk about and dig in to how we can use food price data to understand and improve nutrition. So, thank you. My name is Anna Herforth, and this is Zachary Gersten.
Hi, everyone.
And we work together on the IANDA project, which is from an IANDA grant. And this is the second and last year of the project, so we have some results to share with you. And we would also like to have your input, because in August, we will be going to our two focus countries, Ghana and Tanzania, and running our final workshops for the end users of the indicators that we've developed in this project in those countries. So any ideas and discussion that we get today, we'll be able to incorporate and bring to the countries where we're working to help enrich the discussion and use of food price indicators for nutrition there. So we're really happy to have this chance to discuss. We also have Dr. Joyce Kinabo here from Tanzania, who is a member of our team, and she's liaising directly with a lot of the decision makers in Tanzania, so she'll also be able to take the discussion with her. So, did you want to add anything, Zach?
No, just that we're really excited to be here, and thanks everyone for coming to our learning lab.
Yeah. So the way that we are structuring the learning lab is in the morning, I'll be doing most of the presenting to share with you about the data sources. What are food prices? When we even talk about food prices, what are the sources of data for food prices? Are they adequate, and how to assess whether they're adequate? And then how we have developed indicators of the affordability of nutritious diets. And we'll have discussion points along the way. But then the majority of the discussion will be after lunch. We'll come back, we'll have the workshop that will actually calculate some of these indicators, which you can do by hand, so that you really get a practice at how you can use them with any data that you have. And we'll be able to come up with the indicators in pairs, and then we come back for some group discussion about interpretation and use of the indicators, and what are steps that need to be taken for really to make them useful in all your various contexts where you work. So please come back after lunch because we need your knowledge and your insights. But for the morning, I will get started with some of the information. So the vision of this project, and I should also introduce all our collaborators. You've met Zach and Joyce. We are also working, our team includes Jennifer Coates at Tufts and Will Masters, and Yan Bai, who is a graduate student working on the data. And then Daniel Sarpong at University of Ghana, and Fulgence Mishili at Sokoine University, along with Joyce. So Joyce is our nutritionist in Tanzania, and Fulgence and Daniel are economists, and Rebecca Heidkamp, who is at Johns Hopkins University and works a lot in Tanzania. So the vision of this project and the grant that we had from IANDA is that basically when we speak about food prices, the concept that's measured should reflect the food that people need for active and healthy lives. And it relates very closely to food access and food security. Just to remind everyone, I'm sure you know this definition of the UN on food security, that all people at all times have physical and economic access to sufficient, safe, nutritious food to meet dietary needs and food preferences for an active and healthy life. So to talk about adequate food access, it can't just be stable grains, it can't just be calories, it's nutritious food to meet dietary needs. And when we talk about affordability, that's what we would like to measure. So food prices actually are several different things, which I will go over. I really learned a lot over the course of this grant. Trying to dig into food prices, you sort of hear it and you think, yeah, okay, food prices. But what actually is that? There are several different ways that food prices are calculated and reported. And none actually measure the kind of food people need to eat for adequate nutrition. It's sort of analogous to food security. Anybody here who has worked on indicators of food access or food security knows that, that's sort of people who aren't steeped in that field hear food security, oh, okay, food security. But what is that? There are actually several indicators. Anyone who works on that once immediately will ask, well, how did you measure that? What did you mean about food security? There's experience-based measures, such as the Food Insecurity Experience Scale, which has been scaled up worldwide. There's estimations of hunger. These are most commonly used as food security indicators, but it's always a question of how you measure it. And also, there's no food security or food access indicator I'm aware of that measures the full definition of food security in terms of access to nutritious food to meet dietary needs. So this is also kind of filling that gap, as food prices are actually an indicator of food access. And food prices now, as they're reported, usually they reflect either starchy staples in some cases, which I'll go into, or a basket of foods that's economically important or most often purchased. This doesn't necessarily have anything to do with nutrition. It doesn't mean the price of foods that human beings need to have adequate nutrition or to thrive. So, why do we think it's important to focus on this? So we're here at ANH Academy Week talking about agriculture and nutrition linkages. And there are a lot of agriculture and nutrition linkages, but this is a pathway that's very important and that a lot of programs work on, which is the pathway where an agricultural investment or program seeks to improve food access, to improve diet quality, to improve nutrition. And food access, always keeping in mind that it's, again, that nutritious food to meet dietary needs. But in these key areas, linking agriculture and nutrition, the metrics that we do have are inadequate to really understand those linkages completely. And that's the rationale for why we wanted to work here on the food access area. I just wanted to note that the key recommendations for improving nutrition through agriculture and food systems, which were developed by the Ag to Nutrition Community of Practice, which I know many people in this room are a member of. And if you're not, just Google Ag to number 2 NUT, and you can join. That it's a community of practice that came up with what everybody working on this field thought were important things to do in linking agriculture and nutrition, and it was then adopted by FAO and several other implementing organizations. And one of the recommendations that had broad agreement among stakeholder groups was that it's important to monitor and set targets that make sense for agriculture in terms of nutrition, so move beyond hunger, and further develop metrics of access to and consumption of adequate nutritious food. So again, the food access and diet quality pieces. So Jeff Wage-Secure was instrumental in developing this brief, where the global panel really highlighted the food environment and diet quality as central to what is affected by various policies and actions in the food system. There's these areas in markets, trade systems, food transformation, consumer purchasing power, agricultural production. Actions in all of those areas affect the food environment, which then affects diet quality. So I wanted to just sort of break it down and go back to this concept of food access, which a lot of people work on. And just to highlight that it's composed really of two things. One is the food environment, and then the other is individual level factors like income. So people have often looked at it in terms of food access, in terms of these individual factors. Like, do you personally have resources to access adequate food, which is critical. But it also depends on the food environment. So not only do I have enough income, but is there the food available in my environment that I can use my income to purchase? And what does that food environment look like? How diverse is it? And what am I being encouraged to purchase via marketing or via food prices? So those two areas really interact to then lead to food access and diets. The IANDA Food Environment Working Group, which I'm a member of, has come up with a food environment brief, which you can pick up. I just picked up one outside. It's this. And it has this figure in it, which shows the different components of the food environment and looks at it kind of from an external and personal side. So again, that sort of external environmental side and then the personal side of your own resources interact to then lead to food acquisition. Is this going to? No. Do you know if it's bigger than this? Oh well. Anyway, you can see it leading to food acquisition. But so the food environment having these various pieces, availability, prices. So availability and prices interact with personal levels to determine accessibility and affordability. And then the vendor properties or the product properties and marketing interact with personal factors to affect convenience or desirability of various foods in the food environment. So I was also involved in a review of indicators for FAO on nutrition-sensitive indicators for agriculture. And in all these areas, food environment indicators were really missing in their toolbox. And these are just pictures of various food environments, so you get more of a sense of how they can really affect what people are able and wanting to buy. So in the center there is Rome, and Italy has some of the best, healthiest diets in the world and the longest lifespans. I think they're second in the world. And in Italy, this is at a train station, and there's just fresh, diverse, colorful food everywhere, very easily accessible, that really influences Mediterranean diet consumption. Then on the other side, this is Hara slum in Calcutta, and it's an area where there's a lot of people at risk of undernutrition. And this is a snack food stall where these snack foods compete with healthy foods to gain the attention of young children and mothers trying to buy snacks for their children, affecting diets, like somebody mentioned, not only overweight and obesity, but also competing here with healthy foods that influence whether the children are getting adequate nutrition at all. And then this is in Texas, in South Texas, in the US. This is a drive-through grocery. And you can see here the kind of snack products, so you don't even have to get out of your car to go and pick up the food. And South Texas has some of the worst diets and worst health outcomes in terms of obesity and diabetes and other diet-related chronic diseases. And if you grow up in Rome, it'd be really hard for you to really find anything that you were used to or want to purchase in South Texas, and vice versa. So it's sort of that the food environment really influences your norms and your habits for diet, and the availability of various kinds of foods and also their prices and convenience is all part of that food environment influencing what people end up consuming. This is a food environment in Ghana. This is actually taken in one of the markets where we collected our food price data. And you can see here there's fresh agricultural commodities and also snack foods, and it's kind of a transitioning food environment. And so we felt it's important to kind of track what's going on. Food prices is one means to do that. So all in all, we need these food prices to reflect nutritious diets because one of the main roles of agriculture and food systems is to make nutritious diets more available and affordable. but governments and projects have no information system that tracks the price of nutritious foods currently. And countries can use existing food price monitoring systems to understand the availability and prices of nutritious foods. And these are things that could be monitored potentially by international agencies comparable across countries. And our goal here was to use these existing food price data collection systems to monitor affordability of nutritious diets. And that's a key piece of our work, is to not require that you collect new data, but actually to use existing systems. So what are some of those existing systems? This was the first task of our project. So first of all, there are global food prices. I'll just give an overview in this slide. There's 3 main sources, and there's some other smaller sources, but I'm going to focus on these 3 big sources of food prices. There's global food prices, there's market information systems, and there's consumer prices. I'll tell you what each of those mean. So for global food prices, these are actually collected on the ocean, like on a boat. They're foods that are globally traded, and also global food prices, they might have very little relation to local food prices. It's a broad overview of economically important globally traded commodities, and there are very few commodities here. The FAO Food Price Index collects and tracks global food prices on 5 different kinds of foods: sugar, cereals, dairy, vegetable oils, and meat. So you can see there, that's certainly not motivated by a nutritious diet. It's just like an economic indicator. And our project actually didn't deal with global food prices at all. But just to let you know that sometimes when you hear about food price rises or falling in the news, sometimes what's being reported is these global food prices. And The Economist also has a global food price indicator index, which is also very few commodities. So the next 2 are areas that our project did deal with. So market information systems is the most diverse group of food price information sources. One source is from international agencies that go to markets and either compile or collect food price information. The World Food Program does this. They publish, I think monthly, their Market Monitor, which tracks the price of staple foods in vulnerable countries as a kind of food security, food stock vulnerability early warning system kind of monitor. And also FAO has a global information and early warning system tracking area where they also focus on staple food prices. And these international agencies, most of the time they obtain their data from national governments who are going around collecting prices anyway, but then in some situations data is lacking and then they collect it themselves. So national governments, which is the source of most of this data, this is an area where we still don't quite fully understand the variability across countries. We understand the variability across the 2 countries we worked in, but we have a sense that there could be a greater diversity across other countries. Not even completely sure every country has a ministry that deals with this, probably, but Heather's saying maybe not, and maybe we could actually pause and discuss that a little bit. But the areas of the government that usually collect prices in markets regularly are ministries of agriculture and ministries of trade. And they usually do this fairly frequently. In the countries where we were working, it was at least once a week, actually. Is there any more information in the room on this area of national governments marketing or market information systems? Yeah, Seth wanted to say something.
I think in the Philippines we have Philippine Statistics Authority, and they tracking for commodities that are very important to the region, like rice. I don't know what other regions like in ASEAN, they do that, or in Africa, if they have a regional database or something.
Yeah, so I'll move on to the next one because that's a good point. So if anyone didn't hear, ASEAN is the Southeast Asia regional network collecting prices on really important commodities like rice, and Africa, the East African Grain Council is analogous to that, and we worked with them a little bit in Tanzania, and they only collect staple grain prices. So they're not national, they're regional. And then there's other sub-national associations. So like an example, in Tanzania, the Tanzania Horticultural Association focuses on horticultural prices, but not necessarily in all areas of the country. And then Isoko was a private entity that has started up to collect prices in a limited number of markets. And then in some very large city markets, they have their own market price system. So the largest market in Dar es Salaam has a very, robust system to track prices in their market. It's a really important market, but it's certainly not nationwide data. So there are these, mainly it's national, regional, subnational, and private sources for market information systems, and then a little bit of new data collection from the international agencies. So I'd like to, there's another, I think I'll actually go through the other section before we go into more discussion, but did you have a point?
No, I think it was in the next slide. You're going to go to the national stats offices.
Yeah. So Seth also mentioned the national, the Philippines Statistics Authority. So that's a national statistical organization, and I think these are pretty much in all countries. This is much more homogeneous than the market information systems. So all countries have a national statistical organization, and one of the main purposes of these organizations is to monitor inflation. And they also use food prices and other prices of other goods to determine social programming, such as eligibility cutoffs for social safety nets. And in some countries, like it sounds like the Philippines, also in Tanzania, they are kind of the final stop for all data. Like the other ministries may send their data to the National Statistical Office. And that's not in all countries, but at least we know of two in the room that where that happens.
In India, even the Central Bank or Reserve Bank of India, it compiles all that price data.
Okay.
And then our stock exchange, they also have NCDX.
Yeah.
Agriculture prices also. They monitor many crops future prices also.
Mm-hmm.
The wholesale consumer prices are there. I don't know. I have seen it's a government
No,
website.
that is RBI which it compiles from the ministries they take this data.
From the ministries, yeah.
And we have Ministry of Commerce and Trade, so they compile all that.
So a lot of the data from the ministries gets aggregated at these central
So
statistics.
Central Bank has that.
Okay.
They compile from all other sources.
Central bank. So yeah, I mean, that's one of the things that we've discovered just working within two countries and then hearing about other countries. It's not, the ministries aren't always the same that collect this data, and also the names of the organizations can vary quite a lot. So it's not necessarily an easy thing to say, like, okay, in all countries we're going to look for the National Bureau of Statistics. It's not always that, that it's one of the places that would hold statistics, but it may be called something else.
And then in India we have Commission of Agriculture Cost and Prices also. So they also have the data from farm level, farm data, farm harvest prices.
It would be interesting to do a landscaping of data sources in India for sure. So one of the things collected by National Statistical Organization is consumer prices, which is a different set of prices than agricultural prices collected in markets. They overlap to some degree, but it's a different purpose and a different methodology, and not necessarily the same food list. So the Consumer Price Index determines which products they monitor by household consumption and expenditure surveys. They basically use those surveys to say, what are people actually spending their money on? And then we need to monitor the prices of those things to track inflation. And so they also determine weights from those expenditure surveys. So they determine out of every $100 spent, how much was spent on each product. And food and non-alcoholic beverages make up a large share of expenditures in many countries, so they're a really large feature in the CPI. So in Tanzania, I think it's 48% of expenditures are on food and non-alcoholic beverages. So there's a long food list, and the foods are heavily weighted in the consumer price index. And so the overall consumer price index is all goods, including food. But you can also, most countries report or you can always come up with it if it's not reported, a food CPI, which is the consumer price index only for food and non-alcoholic beverages. And that is where, so that food CPI is also something that's called food prices. So mainly, when you hear food prices, it's mainly one of three things. It's global food prices collected on the ocean of very few commodities. It's market information system information, so agricultural commodities collected in markets around the country, or it's the food consumer price index. And here are a couple of the differences between the two that we focused on in IANDA. So market information system, again, is collected by many different actors at national, regional, subnational, local, and international levels. They don't necessarily collaborate. There's all these different systems. And then the National Statistic Organization collects the consumer price index. The purpose of monitoring information systems is mainly to inform farmers or to monitor food security. And for the CPI, it's to track inflation and inform government programs. The methods for the more ag side is that they're variable methods. And for the CPI, it's standardized, or at least it's supposed to be standardized. There's a UN guide for exactly how to collect the CPI. The market information system data is rarely housed in an open database. It might be, depending on the system and if it's a government ministry, they might have it posted publicly. If it's public, it's often available upon request, but private sources often charge for subscriptions to this data. And for the CPI, it's supposed to be reported annually at least, often either quarterly or monthly. But in reality, again, it can be hard to find for every country. The market information system is generally representative of the level that's covered, whether it's a market, an individual market, whether it's a district, a region, or a country composed of all of these districts. The CPI has an urban bias, and this is an important difference between the two. When we're talking about interpretation and use of indicators that come from either kind of data, the ag side data, you can get very granular. You can get district level representative prices, but you cannot do that from the consumer price index. You can get national level representative and some representation of region, but it's urban biased because it's a national average on how people spend money. So in a lot of the more rural areas, if people aren't spending as much, it's just not as heavily weighted within the consumer price index.
In India, we get segregated CPI, urban CPI, rural, both agriculture and non-agriculture.
Which is best practice. So disaggregating rural, urban, agriculture, and non-agriculture is absolutely best practice, and that's what's recommended by the UN. Not every country does that. It's very important, especially for agricultural countries, because if you're not spending your money, you still may be consuming a lot of own production, and how does that feature in the CPI? So how India does it sounds like it's the full informative way, but in some countries they don't actually impute the prices of what people are consuming from own production. And then the products included are also a very key difference between these two, especially if we're talking about issues of nutrition transition and overweight, obesity, and snack foods. Those are only available in the CPI. So the consumer price index collects information on agricultural commodities and packaged foods, and fortified foods. Sometimes if people spend money on them, then it's there. Baby formulas, there's all of this diversity of products. In the CPI, usually it's 60 to 100 products. But the market information system from the ag side or the trade side, generally it focuses on agricultural commodities and not including packaged goods. So that makes a difference in terms of what kind of indicators you can come up with from these different data sources. And a little bit more on the CPI, it's generally housed on the IMF's website. There was a recent transfer to the IMF. It was on the ILO website for a very long time. Also, FAO is now responsible for reporting food CPIs for the Sustainable Development Goals monitoring system, but it's not doing that yet because there are a lot of gaps in the data, and it's not that system isn't actually yet operationalized. And very importantly for us, we found out after a lot of digging, there is no global repository of metadata on these CPIs. What we thought would be easy to get is to go and say, well, hey, for Nepal, I would like to know what is the list of things that is covered in the CPI? What is it that people are buying, including all the foods? It's not necessarily there. I haven't looked for Nepal, I don't know. But it's there. So the guy I talked to at IMF who runs this compilation is from Ireland, and he said, here it is for Ireland, it's right on our website, which is, again, that's kind of best practice, but most countries do not put on their website the list of things, including foods, that are included, and the list of weights for how these things are, out of every $100, how much is spent on them. So it's pretty opaque. And there's sensitivities about reporting the weights and the prices directly in many countries. So it's not necessarily easy to just simply ask for it, although you can. So the more we tried to dig into this food price data, the more we found kind of how opaque it really is. Starting from what do you even mean when you're saying food prices, to then, well, what foods are included in that? A little bit about our food price. Yes, Joyce.
This is more on CPI, that sometimes, depending on the frequency of data collection, sometimes some things might be dropped from one month to another, depending on the weight. So it's not like a constant list all along. So I think this is something to take note of, that some goods might drop off.
Yeah, the lists change. So a lot of places, I think the issue is more of the list failing to be updated than changing. So a lot of times countries will use the same list and the same weights for many years, whereas as people's habits change, ideally they should be updated. But some, these household consumption expenditure surveys don't happen every year, and it's not always easy to update the food lists. So the food lists do change over time, and then sometimes the data is not even available for, or there might not be that food in the market that's even on the list, so it might drop off. Thanks. Yeah.
This is Seth's question, but I'm going to ask it. Does expenditure on water figure into any of these?
It does if it's bottled water. I don't think so for public sources of water. Yeah. The bottled water is included in the same category usually as like soft drinks and fruit juices and things like that. Yeah.
Now, I just want to ask a question on the role of FAO. If the intention is to track the SDGs through the CPI, is there anything they are thinking of doing in terms of advising the governments as to how they can use the CPI to monitor not so much what people are buying, but comparing that to what would be an ideal basket to meet the nutritional side, just going back to the definition that they gave us?
Yeah.
Because for me, that would be the most useful, use of to the CPI, because you can now track what's happening. If I look at the CPI, say 5 years ago and today, and look at what people have been eating, because as it is now, it's almost like the people, what they're consuming is sort of leading the way instead of saying this is what you should be eating and how far are you from that point, and you kind of track that.
Exactly. Yes, we are on the same page with that. I couldn't have said it better. This is ideally, I agree, what should be done. So I did go to FAO and talk with the people doing this. And at this time, it's just, there are only a couple of people working on this. And they don't even have the data from all the countries on the food CPI as it is now. And we would like to keep talking with them and partner with them to try to use the indicator of the nutritious food basket for a nutritious CPI as an alternative. But I think neither side is quite ready yet, but we definitely, thanks for the encouragement, we should keep talking with FAO to try to make that happen as they get more of their data and as we get more solid in our methods. So I'm going to go through our food price data landscaping in our 2 focus countries, and then I'd like to open it up for more discussion from everyone on any questions or inputs about in your countries the various sources of food price data. So in Ghana, we interviewed representatives from 4 different places. Ministry of Food and Agriculture is MOFA. Then there's eSoko, which is a private grant-funded effort in a few different regions. Then there is GAPTO, which is the Ghana Association of Agricultural Producers and Traders organization, excuse me. They're also private, and you can subscribe to their data. And then there's the Ghana Statistical Service, which collects the CPI. And we ended up working with MOFA and GSS, which I'll go into in much more detail. In Tanzania, there were a large number of potential actors. There was the National Bureau of Statistics, which collects the CPI. The Ministry of Industry and Trade and Innovation, which actually collects the Agricultural Marketing Information System. Not the Ministry of Agriculture, as we found out, although they're the end users of the data. Then there's the Bank of Tanzania, which is involved in some ways, but isn't really, it's more the National Bureau of Statistics we found that is actually the clearinghouse for all data in Tanzania. Tanzania Revenue Authority is another actor, and Viwata, Joyce, what is that group again? I've forgotten, the Kiswahili here. Association of Farmer Groups, and that's private. Yeah. And they are not in all areas of the country, if I remember correctly. Then there's the regional group, the East Africa Grain Council, and then the Tanzania Horticultural Association. And so, kind of analogously, we ended up working with the first 2 here. So in both countries, we ended up working with the statistical organization, which collects the CPI, and then the main government group that collects the agricultural prices. So are there any other kind of inputs from your experience? And also think about not necessarily government sources, but maybe even projects or donors.
So in the past, USAID's food security programs under the Title II program required implementing partners to collect market data as an accountability thing. And in the past, if the organization was thinking about nutrition, which we were supposed to be doing, we collected more than just stable product data. to better understand what was going on in local markets. And this was a lot to do to make sure that the food aid was not disrupting market prices. So linking it back to development analyses.
Yeah. So that's another use that we didn't come across in our landscaping.
Yeah, well, you wouldn't have in those two countries.
Yeah.
Well, in Southeast Asia and the Philippines is an example. We have national nutrition surveys, and part of the surveys include the collection of dietary data, and in connection with the collection of the dietary data, we also ask about how the food items were procured and how much. So there is some information about food prices from the household perspective. Also, in connection with the comment on food baskets, they're not always in the Statistics Authority database. In our case, it's with the National Economic Development Authority. They're in charge of economic policies. So, and then as you have already implicitly stated, the way that food items and food groups are recorded by all of these different agencies can vary. So we have had the experience of trying to reconcile the FAO items that are in their food balance sheets and with our own data collection system from our Bureau of Agriculture and Statistics and with our food consumption databases, and that took us, I think, 4 workshops just to match, and so many items did not match. So it may be that you need to really prioritize certain things. We're going to just focus on nutritious foods, then that may help reduce the list of foods that we will be tracking and comparing.
Could I ask what was the reason why you were reconciling the national level collected food list with the FAO, the food basket?
Well, FAO wanted us to report. We had not been reporting our country data precisely because of all of this complexity in matching the items. Because the FAO list, as you have said, is very much developed along the lines of commodities. So what was traded, or what countries got money for when they were moving food items across countries. But how these foods are eventually consumed is very different, especially now that we have so many processed foods. So if you think of an item like, let's say, cake. Cake can go into wheat. If it is made from wheat flour, it can go into rice. If it's made from rice flour, it will definitely have some sugar and maybe some eggs. And so when you look at it from the consumption end and then try to link it up with the production end, there has to be some regrouping that happens. So those were some of our challenges.
Okay. And just to clarify, the FAO has a lot of different functions. So even within FAO, it's not always the same list. The food balance sheets have a much longer list of commodities than the food price index, which only has those 5.
So this is more a question, I guess, than identifying another data source. But in a constraint to using household surveys before, aside from the consumption and expenditure module that you get from those, you tend to have agricultural production modules, right? And so because of certain constraints in using the consumption and expenditure side, it had in West Africa, it had to use the agricultural production and taking price from that, right? So we know how much a household produces and how much they sold that for, and then we compute sort of implicit prices. And I guess the question is to what extent maybe we can use those 2 modules in the same survey to test the quality of the price data across both modules, right? So we have the consumption and expenditure side, which tends to go into the CPI, but we also have this ag household module side to the same survey, which we can generate prices for the same types of foods maybe, or maybe the list is different, why would we use one or the other? So
Yeah.
broad question.
Yeah, well, it's a good point because not all countries generate their food list for the CPI from the same kind of survey. And ideally, it's supposed to be an open-ended listing by households in a household consumption survey for them to say, these are all the things we bought and this is what we paid for them. But sometimes it's not open-ended. They're just given the foods, so it might miss foods that people are consuming, but they're not on the survey. Or sometimes they may not have that expenditure survey, so they use an agricultural production survey, as you said. The prices would be different because the prices on the ag side would be farm gate prices, whereas in the consumption side, they would be market prices. So I don't think you could use that to validate prices because you'd expect them to be different. But
Exactly. So maybe that's a good point. So then maybe that's the key use of that, right? To see how the farm gate price is different from. So again, I guess it's going off the side from the affordability, but thinking about
Right.
from the producer side.
Exactly.
Right. Is it affordable in terms of the pricing?
Right. So, and I'm glad you brought that up because for affordability and cost of nutritious diets, what we really want are consumer prices. We really want to know what people have to pay at markets. So we'd rather not use farm gate or wholesale prices, but we want retail prices.
Well, my question was actually related to that because particularly for the data that's collected by private entities, especially your pharma-related organizations, they're really more interested in tracking the prices so they can go to markets where they are going to maximize the price. Whereas the consumer is actually working from the other end. They would prefer that the prices are as low as possible. So the objectives are quite different. So in a sense, the choice of the data source must also consider that the objectives in collecting these prices has to match who we are targeting. If it's the consumers, then of course you need to choose the appropriate
Right.
data.
Right. Yeah. And thanks for bringing that up too, because when we talk about the use of these indicators and the potential audiences and interpretations, I think that both of those groups are end users. Consumers would be interested in how much they have to pay for our nutritious diet at various markets. And then producers would be interested in what sorts of food to invest in because the price is high or it's not available, so that it's an opportunity for them to then start providing that food to that market. So I think they're important user groups to keep in mind. And choices.
Probably what the previous speakers have said
is really related to decisions, decisions of producers and decisions of consumers. So how do we integrate that into the affordability and cost of diet? Because really this is based on decisions to produce and sell and decision to buy and consume.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thanks for reiterating that main question as we think about uses of the indicators.
Just one more question before we move. In relation to the demand side, to what extent the consumers can influence what the producers of the food will do and play into the pricing? Because if consumers are just takers of what's available on the market and are not demanding because they don't have knowledge of nutrition, but if the consumers were a big movement and they said, no, we're not buying this is what we want. Now, in that mix, I'm just wondering how prices would move when now you could actually use prices to predict which way things were going to go or vice versa.
Mm-hmm. That's an excellent research question and use of the indicators, I think.
I think we've seen this happening within one of the villages recently, and we're talking to consumers sort of, and they were telling us that these soft drinks, Coca-Cola and whatnot, are not good. So in a way, they are not going to pay for certain products. And obviously, the companies will tend to still want to use those consumers and put the price down. And while we were there, we noted that there was like a slight change in the price of cocoa that area. So in a way, that would happen. It's obvious reaction to certain products.
Yeah. Well, yeah, ideally this price information on various kinds of foods and nutritious diets could help inform consumers about really what is relatively expensive or cheaper in terms of the health outcomes they may get from it and what prices they're facing in the market. So back to going through our experience in the 2 focus countries of IANDA. We, as I mentioned, we had 2 sources in each country that became the key data sources. And the reasons that these were the data sources we used instead of any of the others were that they were national government organizations, which was important to us because the whole intent was not just an academic exercise to create indicators, but to really create something that could actually be used and tracked at national level and potentially reported internationally. So it was important to us that it be a national stakeholder and not just a project or a private organization. Also, the other main thing about the government actors is that they have nationwide operation. So we could, another goal of our project was to be able to compare food prices in different areas of the country. And they also have a mandate to provide public data. And they had adequate diversity in their food lists so that we could construct indicators. Unlike, for example, the Grain Council, we could not construct an indicator of nutritious diet just from staple grain prices. So that's one of the prohibitive limitations of some of the other data sources. And so this is important for you if you're thinking about using these indicators for any purpose. Like, I should also say that while our intent was to create indicators at national level that could be used by governments, you can also use the methodologies for creating these indicators at really any level. So if you have a project and you want to track prices of nutritious diets using any one of the indicators, you can do that. So when you're thinking about data sources you may have for any area where you're working, one of the limitations is if the food list is not diverse enough, then you wouldn't be able to say anything realistic about a nutritious diet. Okay, so back for our purpose, if the food price data was geographically limited, then it didn't quite fit our purpose. And if their business model was to pay for data, we didn't really want to partner with that type of organization for this project. However, we did find that, especially in our Tanzania meeting, actually it was in Ghana as well. ISOCO is a group that's in many countries in Africa. And they are the private group collecting prices at a few markets in each country where they're operating. And they were very interested to potentially partner with even the government organizations. They have a much leaner data collection system. A lot of the government agencies still use like pen and paper and send things by mail, and it's hard to put together. And that's one reason it's not publicly available, because it's just hard to put everything online all the time. So ISOCO has a very lean system where they collect prices via a mobile phone app, and it's instantly available. That's why people pay for it. And they were talking about even collaborating with the government to try to make the data collection a little bit more usable. Is there any situation where non-national data sources could be useful in your experience? Yeah.
Yeah, we're working on a project with Joyce and other colleagues in Tanzania and Ethiopia. And we're collecting sort of local level data at village level, which we can sort of relate to the nutritional outcomes. So we have evidence that's specific to that particular location, which I believe the national data would be a fallback position if we didn't have local data. We prefer local data for that reason.
Okay. Yeah. Local data probably is also very helpful for consumers.
the prices can vary very much when you're looking at it from the consumer perspective, simply because of the other transactional costs that come with food access. So in those cases, we need subnational food price data, and those are usually also collected by local governments as part of their being part of the statistical system of the national government. They would have those kinds of prices, but only for certain items, not for a lot.
That's a good point, that even within a national system, there maybe in some countries, the local data is collected by different organizations, possibly.
Yeah, in India also, like the state government they collect and then it is compiled at national level. So you get disaggregated data also.
Yeah.
It seems like it could be quite useful for planning on smallholder farms in terms of what they're going to consume and what they're going to sell. So if you wanted to make another plan for smallholder farms to, in terms of comparative advantage and different how they should travel and how to sort of help them, agricultural extension workers could really help in that rural urban planning. I don't know, it could be quite useful because I assume there would be quite a lot of variability, especially in countries where there are much different climates across and different places where it's better to grow or sell certain items.
Yeah. Yeah, so if you were working with smallholders in a particular locality, imagine that we have our indicators fully in place in the government, and the government actually collects data in that district. You could use that, but even so, it might not fit your purpose, because some of the, like in Ghana, where they have a very robust system in all the districts, they still might only hit one market in that district. So if you're working with smallholder farmers who may sell at several small markets in a district, you might go and collect your own data in many small markets to try to inform like where the prices are changing. Yeah, great. So we had an initial workshop in our project in each country, and first I told about Ghana and then Tanzania. So in Ghana, the statistical service at our workshop, they expressed a willingness very early on to compute and track a nutritious food CPI. They said basically, tell us what to track and we'll do it. They have a standard list of 82 foods, so there's a lot to work with. Then the Ministry of Food and Agriculture, Statistical Research and Information Directorate, HOFA SRID, they have a very robust monitoring system in all districts in the country, and the head of the marketing unit there is a strong champion for this idea. The reception that we got in the workshop was kind of like, oh, yeah, we could absolutely do that. We just never thought of using our food prices for nutrition. But let's do it. That would be great because they do have a mandate for tracking food security, and they recognize that at high levels that food security is more than just the staple grains. Oh, that's on again. So they were very interested in the idea. And so along with tracking food security, they also have a mandate to ensure economic viability for farming. And another interest that they had was that if they're collecting a diversity of foods, like a greater diversity, they could have more information to share with farmers and businesses about what sorts of food products would be best to invest in. So they track production and food price data on a weekly basis in 164 markets nationwide, which provides a really powerful structure to track these indicators. But they really were missing the kind of information that could let them know if their operations were doing anything affecting nutrition, and to support their decision making about what they could do within the Ministry of Food and Ag to better improve nutrition. And so their existing food price data collection was missing quite a number of nutritious foods. It could be used for many basic commodities, but couldn't really It could sort of be used as it was for tracking nutritious diets, but it was missing a lot of important foods. So then it was difficult to really formulate informed policies and programs about nutrition in the country. So what we did was we worked with them. They gave us their food list that they go out collecting every week in all 164 markets. And we reviewed that list, and these were the steps that we took to determine what foods would need to be added. So right off the bat, we saw that there were almost no vegetables in it. There were onions and tomatoes, but not even okra, which was really important in Ghana. And they themselves were surprised. They said, oh, we used to collect okra, why isn't it on the list anymore? And then there were no leafy green vegetables. So we saw that immediately. But in terms of which exact foods we needed to add, what we would have done is used a dietary survey of what foods people consume most often, but it wasn't available. So instead, we compared it to the list of foods that is already collected by the Ghana Statistical Service as a first step, because it's a longer list, and that shows what people at least spend money on. And then we interviewed nutritionists at the various parts of the government who are very familiar with food consumption in Ghana, and also University of Ghana nutrition researchers. So we aim to include nutritious foods that are commonly consumed by the average household. So not foods that are very rare, not all the possible foods, because we wanted to make the list as concise as possible, because the more foods we add, the more time it takes for the enumerators to go out and collect all the foods. So we wanted a concise list of foods that are not rare and not very, very expensive, because those also wouldn't be bought very often by the average household. So we added 22 foods in all, which was a 40 or 50% increase actually in their food list. And so a lot of them were dark green leafy vegetables, some fruits, 2 additional beans and seeds, meat and fish in the form typically bought by consumers. So they had things like a whole goat or a live chicken, but they didn't have like goat meat or chicken meat that people would consume, or fish even. A lot of people buy like a whole fish, and they didn't have that on their survey. So we added those, and then we piloted the expanded list over 7 weeks in 4 geographically disparate regions, and it went fine, and they actually decided to institutionalize the expanded list nationwide. So we went out with the enumerators, and we saw how they go about collecting their data, and here on the top, they initially were saying, oh, the leaves are too light, we can't weigh them, we can't take the prices of leaves. But then, of course, we just went to the market, and they're obviously sold in bundles, and it was fine, so it worked out. So right now, at this moment, they're expanding the extended list to 10 regional offices, and 20 major selected markets have already started using it. And then they'll have weekly market price reports supposedly starting around now on these first 20 markets. So they really, especially this major champion that we are working with in the Ministry of Food and Ag, he went to FAO, to the Committee on World Food Security event, to talk about what Ghana is doing in this area. And what he said was that they really appreciate just the plain availability data, not even indicators of cost, but just being able to say where green leafy vegetables are being sold in markets and where they're unavailable. Because when businesses come to them and request data to understand the market on decisions on what they're going to invest in and produce, they were limited to the scope of foods that had been collected. Now that that scope is broadened, the potential growers, smallholders, businesses have information on where and when to produce a more diverse set of foods. So in this way, I think it's a really working with the ministry has been a valuable process for just, I think, enhancing diversity in the food system by simply providing information. These foods are no longer invisible. As far as the indicators, they probably won't track them themselves. They'll probably partner with the Ghana Statistical Service or the Ministry of Health to provide the market data, and then either one of those two organizations will then compute the indicators and provide a report about how food prices are changing. So this really demonstrated that the existing monitoring system can be used with very little added cost to provide better information. So then in Tanzania, we just learned how two different countries can be in terms of their systems and what's possible to change and what's not possible to change and the reasons for that. So we also had our workshop there last year, and National Bureau of Statistics came to present about their data collection, which is 95 items, food and non-alcoholic beverages, and that it's the main clearinghouse for all statistics in Tanzania. They also expressed willingness and interest to produce a nutritious food price index as long as they didn't have to change their food list. So what I just described in Ghana, I want to emphasize, was the market information system. That was the Ministry of Agriculture, which can do whatever they want. Whereas when you're collecting a CPI, you're very much bound to that list based on the survey of what people actually spend, because it's an important economic indicator. So they could not, similar to the Ghana Statistical Service, they could not add foods to their list because it is what it is, what people buy. But that said, we didn't really have to add foods because it has 95 items. So no matter how the statistical agency actually weights them, at least they're there in the list. They did also express the goal of becoming more regionally and even district representative. So they expressed that right now they have an urban bias, but they would like to collect more data in more areas so that they could really represent all the areas of the country, and they're sort of moving towards that in the next year or so. So we have a strong champion within the NBS and also the junior staff there who are really responsive to working with us and providing data that we could use for calculating the indicators. There's also the Ministry of Industry and Trade and Innovation, which, as I mentioned, is responsible for collecting the agricultural data. But it's a very weird system because they started collecting these statistics only since 2010. Before that, it was collected by a different ministry, which is now dissolved, in a different place in the country for 10 years. And before that, it was collected by the Ministry of Agriculture, Livestock and Fisheries since I think the country's independence. So the Ministry of Agriculture is the key end user of the information, just like in Ghana, but they're not now collecting the data. And so there has to be a partnership there, and what they're discussing, but it's not fully institutionalized, as far as I'm aware, is that they're maybe the Ministry of Industry and Trade collects the data and then gives it to Ministry of Ag, which then analyzes the food prices for their own use. So challenges in this area is because of how the roles were passed around and ministries that don't even exist anymore, there's a lack of continuity of data. There's also unclear responsibilities for data analysis and data provision. And we also had trouble working with the Ministry of Industry and Trade because they didn't come to our workshop even though they were going to give a presentation there. And then we really couldn't even contact them. So when we finally did get in touch with them, they told us that they have this software system which they don't like, that's really outdated, and they can't physically add or change anything in the system as far as their food list. So they just said, like, we know we need to overhaul our system, but we don't have the resources to do it right now, and so we really can't help you. We can't add anything. So we couldn't do a review or expansion of their food list, analogous to the Ghana context. We also had a couple of other players that came up as important in Tanzania. The Prime Minister's office they were really interested in the efficiency of data collection across various agencies in the country and would be an end user of the data for policy purposes. And there was a champion from their office who's really interested in these indicators and possibly using them, even though they don't actually collect the data. Then there's also the National Evaluation Platform, which is a collaboration between Johns Hopkins University and national stakeholders, which compiles all relevant data for health. And within that, they have some data on nutrition. Lots of health side statistics on nutrition-specific indicators like vitamin A programming and maternal anemia, but no nutrition-sensitive statistics or indicators. So for the scaling up nutrition effort in Tanzania, it's very difficult to track progress on any nutrition-sensitive investments, and agriculture is a key sector in that. So they're really interested in having some nutrition-sensitive indicators, such as the ones we're producing for food prices. And this NEP is a model for a proposed national information platform for nutrition by the European Commission, which is proposed to take place in all sun countries, and Tanzania is a sun country scaling up nutrition. It's not off the ground yet, but it's supposed to be happening. So within the next few years, we may see the NEP transformed into a national platform for information for nutrition. So that's another really important stakeholder in Tanzania. So the way forward that we have is slightly different than in Ghana. So we will only work with the National Bureau of Statistics data. We can construct all 4 indicators from that, but like I said, it has the urban bias. We can't get down to district level. And we will hold a workshop next month with all of the stakeholders that I just mentioned. And so we envision a partnership where NBS provides the data to the Tanzania Food and Nutrition Center. And then the National Evaluation Platform supports the Tanzania Food and Nutrition Center to compute and report the indicators. And that those indicators could then be integrated into the National Evaluation Platform. So there's a lot of players, but it could be there are a lot of ways for the data to actually be used. And I don't know if at this point, Joyce, you would like to add anything. You may have misrepresented some points or might not be current on the situation in Tanzania. So.
Only that on the issue of MITI and their software, I think they claim that it was installed by FAO, and therefore they had to liaise with FAO in order to change that list. So I hope that something is happening. They promised that they will do something, and we offer to facilitate that process, but we haven't had much from them. So we don't know what is not happening. We'll probably catch up with them when we hold the workshop next month. Yeah. Otherwise, everything is.
Well, maybe if we have the TFNC and the NBS working together and they can actually see how indicators are used, they might have more interest.
Right now, what is happening, we have the household budget survey, and we try to convince the National Bureau of Statistics to include a bit of some of the food items that are missing in the initial list. And they promised to do that because they haven't the mandate to do that. But we haven't seen the questionnaire, so we're not sure whether all the vegetables and fruits were included in the household budget survey too.
Yeah. So that's an important point of once they have their list, they can't add foods to it, but the household budget survey, which determines their list, has to have all the foods in it, so that they have the complete universe of important foods in the country. So I think we'll have some progress in our workshop there, and it really represented this whole process of working with the different stakeholders in both countries. Just showed, I know you've all experienced this in your work of just how important it is to have a key person who's responsive and really interested as a partner. And if you don't have that 1 or 2 people to engage with, you really can't get anywhere.
I have a question. I don't want to make this any more complicated than it already is, but in the rural areas, there is some amount of own food production. From our experience in the Philippines, most of these comes in the form of vegetables and other things that go with the staple. So, and these might not necessarily have a price, or people won't put a price on it. And in fact, these might be things that they would barter or exchange with neighbors. So how would that be captured? Because I know you're using the price as a proxy for access, but these are also sources of nutrients. So how would that be captured by this approach?
Thanks. If it's truly not sold in any market, it would not be captured. If it's sold in markets, then it would be most likely collected by the ag side more than the consumer price index type of data. It would be more likely to be in the ag side data. But it's a limitation. I mean, this is market food prices, and you're absolutely right that food access is not only markets. We've sort of, in the field of ag and nutrition, in the past several years, there was a lot of focus on just home production as food access. And so this is like the other side of it, where obviously people buy food in markets. So you have to have information on market food prices and access. But it's the two, definitely, for rural households that are farming. Inga?
Shout?
Yeah.
In Ghana, I know there are quite some street foods consumed, like egg. Tanzania, I'm not sure. How do you take that into account? Because the price will be different and the price of the different components.
Street foods?
Street foods, yeah. So let's say processed foods.
They wouldn't be included in this data because the Ministry of Agriculture definitely won't collect them.
Also not like candy. I mean, it's so.
They only collect commodities. They collect like maize flour, not whatever's produced from it or anything that's like a cooked food. They would not collect that. It's possible it could be in the statistical data for the CPI if it's a large enough category of expenditure. It's not right now. It's not in their list. So certainly that's a good point that this data doesn't collect everything people buy, but it collects. That's the thing when you're thinking about the food list and whether it's adequate. It's not probably going to be super productive to think about everything people eat because then you have an untenable food list you can certainly, if you were working with your own project, you can collect as many foods as you want and use that for a very detailed and very good representative food list to calculate indicators. But for our purpose, where we're working with national systems, we needed to have a balance of what is mainly consumed and represents enough diversity in the diet and what's feasible for them to collect. They're not going to collect 200 items. They're going to be limited to how many they can feasibly monitor 2 or 3 times a week.